Welcome to the introduction to Chapter 4. In your lesson, you should have already done the assignment on the next page in your OneNote. So this is the assignment you just did in your OneNote. Make sure you have that finished because I will be looking at that when I check off your classwork at the end of the unit. Before we begin, let's talk about the two main themes in this chapter. First of all, we're going to be looking at what was the human Jesus like. In other words, we're looking at the historical Jesus. So here we're focusing on his humanity. What was Jesus' life like as a person? What kind of job did he have? What did he learn in school? What was it like to be a Jew in first century Palestine? We're going to be watching a documentary to help you understand that. And then we're going to ask a theological question. There's a big theology section in this chapter as well that asks the question, why did God have to become human? What was the saving mission of God that's accomplished through Jesus Christ? So by the end of this chapter, you're going to be able to answer the question, why does God become man? Because if you think about it, if God's all-powerful, he could have accomplished salvation on his own, right? Why does he become human in Jesus Christ? And you'll be able to answer that question at the end of this unit. Now, before we begin, let's review some theology from last year. First of all, if we're talking about God becoming man, we start with this question, the incarnation. So you learned about the incarnation last year. The word incarnation comes from the Latin in, incarnate, which means literally into the flesh. So God is going into the flesh. The church has a name for the point in history at which Jesus becomes incarnate. It's called the fullness of time. So at the fullness of time, in other words, in the first century in Palestine, at the fullness of time, the Son of God came down from heaven and became man without losing his divine nature. I would add two qualifiers to this definition to make it more complete. I would say the Son of Man came down from heaven and became fully human without losing his divine nature. In other words, he's fully divine. Now, you might not think that those two qualifiers make a big difference, but they do. And the reason why is because in the very early days of the church, there were a lot of heresies that disagreed about what the incarnation was about. So you're going to learn more about those second semester. You already learned about them a little last year, but a lot of Christians assume that Jesus came down, told the apostles everything. They wrote it down in the Bible right away, and we always knew about Jesus what we know today. That's not how it happened. The theology developed over a long period of time. The Trinity is never clearly expressed as we understand it today in Scripture. So it's important that you say that he's fully human and fully divine, because you're going to see in the early church, some people said that, well, no, he wasn't really human. He only pretended to be. Others are going to say, well, Jesus was half man and half God, but the two natures weren't united. So we'll be looking more at that throughout the course of the year. So that's just a brief review of the incarnation. Now, the incarnation describes the idea that Jesus was always with God and became man. Now that begs another question. What does that mean? What does it mean to say that Jesus is fully human and fully divine? We have another word that describes that. Here it says Jesus has a human body, a human soul, and a human intellect, and a human will. But he also has a divine. He also is the divine Son of God with a divine intellect and the divine will of God. So we have a term for that. It's called hypostatic union. Now, if you pull this out at a Servite football game, and the gentleman at Servite hear you talking about hypostatic union, they're all going to want to talk to you. So hypostatic union describes the incarnation. It's the idea that Jesus is human nature. Sorry, my smartboard's kind of wiggy there. Jesus' human nature is united to his divine nature. His divine nature in the one person, Jesus Christ. So some of these terms are hard for us to understand because the term person and nature, these are Greek philosophical terms that we don't really use anymore. What we're saying here is that Jesus' human will and divine will are united. It's not as if Jesus is schizophrenic and sort of has half his mind is God's and half of it is human. Jesus' human will, his human mind is aware that he is also the divine Son of God. So he's not like a Hercules, half man, half God. He is the human will and the divine will are united with one another in a single person, Jesus Christ. So this is hard for us to understand because we never experienced this. But that begs another question. Human nature is limited. If Jesus has a human mind, but then he also has the divine mind of God, and he knows God's will, which is unlimited. This begs the question, did Jesus always know he was God? Did Jesus always know every detail of God's plan for him? Well, Jesus always knew he was God. His human will and his divine will are united. So they're not separate. However, think about it. If his human mind is limited, it's going to take him a while to understand the fullness of the divine mind and the divine plan. In the scriptures, it says, for example, in Luke's gospel, where Jesus is at the temple teaching, after his parents start to go back and they find him in the temple, it says that Jesus grew in his knowledge. So the human mind of Jesus had to grow into the full sense of his divine self. So that probably took time. But we know by the time Jesus starts his ministry in his 30s that he does seem to be fully aware of God's plan for him. He fully accepts it, and he's fully committed to enacting that plan. So, again, we can't completely understand this, but what we can understand is that his human mind and his human will were united to God's. However, it might have taken some time for that human mind to catch up in understanding the fullness of God's plan for him. So if you want to read more about this, on Moodle I have in the Chapter 4 book, under the handout section, a supplement called Did Jesus Always Know He Was God? It's just a little article that explains this hypostatic union more if you want further reading. Now, what we're going to do before we go any further is we're going to talk about Jesus' parents. As a human being, he has parents. We're going to talk about St. Joseph here with a prayer service, and we're going to do that at the end of this chapter to wrap things up. But for Mary, it's being blocked off down here. For Mary, we're going to do 20 times. So if you were absent, you should do the Mary Flip lecture on Moodle. And let me show you where that's at. On Moodle, and I'm not sure if I have it open here. It might take me a minute to get to it. But what you're going to do is you're going to do the Mary Flip lecture on Moodle, and there's a quiz right after it. And what we're going to be doing in class is you're going to be doing something called 20 times. So I'm making a covenant with you. Promise me that you will do the flip lecture at home. It's only 1 minute and 39 seconds. And if you do the Mary Flip lecture at home before class, I promise to have a good activity for you to work on in class. Now, if you don't do the Mary Flip lecture, and it looks like I can't show it to you, my connection is not good. If you don't do the Mary Flip lecture, then you're going to do that in class, the next class, and then you're going to have homework because you won't have enough time to finish your Mary 20 times. I don't want to tell you too much what the 20 time is right now. I want it to be, something fun for you to work on in class. But finally, let me show you the Mary Flip lecture. I apologize. So, Paschal Mystery. If we scroll down here under Chapter 4, you'll see under Lessons and Lectures, Mary Flip Lecture. This was the homework for October 1st. So if you were absent and you didn't get to do this assignment, then and you're listening to this lecture because you're absent, make sure you do this. If you complete it late, then you need to email me your score, and we will pick up with looking at Mary next class. Thank you.